Yeah, and we used to work out. We'd put cards on a wall, and try and work out all the story elements. That same trying to find what were the processes, the steps. I'm not rigid about sequences, but I do think the characters have to have surprise and interest and opportunity and adversity. And but those things will come if you just keep saying to yourself, keep this interesting, don't get bogged down, keep going forward to your goals. I've succeeded in getting my first feature, which I directed solo, called The Kiss, by going through the script and taking out just all the dead time. And literally the script, it's an entirely different headspace to when you're writing. And this was a script that two other writers have worked on. And I tried to make every pause that was unnecessary, tried to make the scenes energetic by going, can I come in later so that we're actually in process and we didn't do any walk up to it? Can I get out earlier so that the scene doesn't resolve, but the next scene answers the question? And by doing that, I kept an energy and got that movie made. And if you do have to look at my book, there is a section on editing, which I love, because once you've got, I call the first draft of a script the Lewis and Clark. Any frickin' way to the coast is legitimate. You've got to get this story out of you, and you can't put agendas on how many days it's going to take or how many things. You have to look at it as an adventure, and you've got to get to the coast. And it doesn't matter what you write to get to that coast, because once you've got there, you have this blissful moment of accomplishment, which you must celebrate. And then you look back and you see, okay, now I'm going to put the freeway through. And I'm going to go and take out the pieces I didn't need, combine the characters, but I now know I've written my script, because until it's written, it's an uncompleted emotional thesis. And when you put the freeway through, you put the signposts up so you don't lose your audience. And when we did testing of films, we would, get cards and things, and the audience would tell us where they lost pieces of the story. And we found that as soon as the story made perfect sense and seemed like you'd written it overnight, because it all seemed to work, the scores went up. And so that's what you're trying to do with your story. And I think whether it's 5 sequences, 6 sequences, these are almost more important things, which is writing tight, making sure that the story keeps telling you forward with a sense of mystery to know what's going to happen. We want to hook at the beginning and draw the audience through it, and not tell them what's going to happen and then demonstrate it. That's a thesis for a science project. What we're trying to do is to set up people so that they can't imagine what's going to happen, and you don't give them enough time on the page to get bored or to get ahead of you.
And a lot of times, taking a very formulaic, structural kind of beat by beat type, outline sort of approach, we tend to forget how important relationships are in the story that we're telling, because we're just trying to fit this one main character, story in a structure, and we tend to forget that relationships are so important in terms of it allowing the characters to emote and be challenged. And anyway,
that can come as layers, Max, because and as a writer, this, that just get to the first, and then someone like yourself says, well, yeah, but your character here, I had a script that I was utterly passionate about, that I could only get up to like 14 pages on it. And I kept crashing, couldn't, but I had 600 pages of notes. I was like going nuts. And I would drive my assistants crazy, because I would card it out and try and find my way through. And I had the intuition to talk to a woman called Kristen Hahn, who was working at Plan B and had done a book on spiritual mentors. And I just utterly knew I had to talk to her about my story for some sort of like gestaltic reason. And I knew she would think I was hitting on her or something weird, but I bumped into her and said, can I take you to lunch? Started to tell her my story, which takes place in Albuquerque. She comes from Albuquerque. And it's about a detective with a tragedy in his past who's teamed up with a tribal policewoman, and the two of them go off on a murder investigation. And she said, if you thought, make the woman a witch. And she unzipped my head, because suddenly, instead of seeing her as the motorbike that this guy rides through the Navajo world, I suddenly saw her as a three-dimensional character, struggling with her own belief systems, trying to serve her people through both the logics of what she dealt with on a daily basis, but also the beliefs that were powerful in her world, and that I saw that she also had to have a struggle, and that in her struggle, I had this intuition, which was she's born from a mother who had cancer, and the woman had gotten cancer from the uranium tailings, which are left all across the Navajo lands from industrial use of them. And her mother elected not to get treated because it would have killed her unborn child. And therefore she died, but her daughter was born. And that's the burden that this tribal policewoman is now worried that she's not good enough to belong to her people. And she's become a tribal policewoman in order to serve her people, trying to find a way of believing in herself. And the story takes her through that and makes her become a whole person. And that one line opened that whole flow of who she was. So that's the joy, that stories are flexible, they're magical. You never know when you're going to get an insight that ripples through the whole thing and makes you grin with the, oh, I got to go do that, got to tweak that. That means I'll tweak that and I'll tweak this. And it just gets richer.